So thank you. We have a great panel, and I think we have a great topic. And I think it's a challenging one for CIOs, for vendors, for consultants, and for pretty much anybody else who might be in the room. And that's really talking about value and what is value when it comes to IT. And we're going to dissect that in a couple of different ways. First, I think I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have a very interesting group. We'll start right here with Mohamad Ali, who is the Senior Vice President and Head of Corporate Development and Strategy for Avaya. We have Mark Ferrantino, who is the Chief Technical Architect for Salesforce.com. We have Jim Walker, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Morgan Stanley Smith Barney. And on the end, we have Ben Hassan, who is the Vice President of People Systems for Walmart. So, value. I think when we all started talking about this, I kind of asked the question, what does it mean? What does it mean to most people? And it's a challenging thing for most CIOs. I think one of the biggest things is trying to figure out how to demonstrate it, how to measure it across their entire company and across their own organization. I guess it's estimated that about 6% of revenue is spent on IT, maybe on average. And the number of companies that actually know how to measure what they're getting from that is astoundingly low. So I think we want to talk about a couple of different ways that IT can provide value for the organization and see what is being done within these companies, what these guys have seen from their own experience, and see what they're hearing out there among their clients and their colleagues. So let's open it up. Let everybody go through for a couple of minutes and just sort of tell a little bit about yourself and what your take is on this topic that we're going to be discussing.
Great, thank you. I'm Mohamad Ali. I'm not chief of anything. Thank you. It's all right.
I like to give everybody some nice titles.
I'm not even a CIO, but I have opinions about CIOs. And I guess that's part of our discussion here today. So I oversee our corporate development, our M&A work at Avaya. Avaya is about a $5 billion plus business, for those of you who don't know. I also oversee our strategy, all of our research labs. So Avaya spun out of AT&T, so there are parts of Bell Labs in there. And I also oversee our emerging products group. Our emerging products group create new products in the communications space. What Avaya does is it provides sort of voice, video, and data networking infrastructure, as well as applications on top of that. With respect to value, I'll sort of give you the perspective of where I'm coming from, and then we could talk about value a little bit more as we go forward here. So how do I interact with CIOs? So I'm not a CIO, we established that, right? But I'm a customer of the CIO. When we do an M&A transaction, like we acquired Nortel, well, IT becomes a critical part of executing that. And traditionally people look at IT as sort of the back office piece of an M&A transaction. It's really not. It's both back office and front office. Front office being sales and product rollout and so forth, right? And the CIO all of a sudden comes into focus pretty heavily. And as the M&A guy, I get to ascribe whether the CIO is generating value for me or not. So I'm a customer. I'm also a vendor to CIOs. As a communications company, we sell products, voice, video, data networking products, apps, and so forth to CIOs. And then thirdly, is given that I'm sort of a technologist at heart, I oversee our research labs, I have opinions, and oftentimes I provide unsolicited advice to our own IT staff, much of which is not appreciated. And so as a result, I've developed a variety of perspectives on how CIOs can add value in an organization, measure value, provide that value in a back office capacity, a front office capacity, and how business unit leaders, sales leaders, and so forth can truly appreciate that. And we could chat about that as we go forward.
So already introduced, thank you, Mark Ferrantino, Chief Technical Architect of Salesforce. Salesforce, most of you guys may or may not know, we provide a CRM product. I think hopefully most of you are already using it. In addition to our CRM product, we also have a platform that's underneath it called Force.com. And if you don't already know about it, you should ping me afterwards, and I'll be happy to tell you about it. Over the last 6 months, I've kind of gone on a journey where I've been out in the field and I've talked to a number of CIOs. I've done these sort of councils and panels and individual visits. I've logged a lot of miles on Delta, Virgin America, and a number of other airlines. And I've gone around and kind of talked about a handful of things that CIOs are interested in, such as governance, data retention, business continuity, agile methodologies, and also innovation, and then of course the big one is business IT relations. Those are always, that's kind of, in every organization it's a little bit different. And you know, one of the kind of takeaway, the broad takeaway I have is that a lot of CIOs are spending time on things that don't have a lot of value. They spend a lot of time on keeping the lights on. They spend a lot of time on building applications which they shouldn't be building, which don't really add any real value to their business. If someone's building a T&E application, well, that's just, what value? Are you really going to move the needle? Are you really moving the top line by building the best T&E application at your organization? You're probably not. There's plenty of vendors out there who can do those applications for you. And you should, and so as a CIO, you should really focus on getting a lot of those applications that don't really move the needle, don't really move the dial for the company, for the top line at all. Get those off your plate. Move those into, whether you have Accenture or someone else hosting them, or you go with a provider like Salesforce or Concur for the T&E example. Probably seemed like the right path, the right direction. Some of you guys may know of a book called The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, and it's all about kind of focusing on what's important and what's relevant, and kind of taking all the menial tasks and outsourcing them to other people. I think I'm going to write a book called The 4-Hour CIO, because I think there's something really interesting there, where as a CIO, you should be focusing more on things that are adding value, where all your attention is spent on high-value items inside your organization that then you can show value, you can be strategic, and you're not as tactical, and then and really take the rest of the kind of blocking and tackling and try to move as much of it out of your organization as possible.
Okay, Jim.
Jim Walker. I'm the COO for what's called Investment Strategy and Solutions at Morgan Stanley. And succinctly, that's kind of the product platforms and all the research. So basically the stuff we make. I'm not a technology executive. I actually spent the first 16 years of my career in sales and sales leadership, so more customer-facing roles. And then evolved into, I was the chief operating officer at Merrill Lynch for a private client. And then in my current role, working with product platforms. So, I mean, I share that with you because I was, one of those people on the other side, like, how come these IT guys can't get these things done quickly? I got stuff to sell. And then 2 years in on the other side, I went native. I said, these sales guys are crazy, So, I think I kind of understand both languages. The topic at hand is, business value of IT, which is a great topic and not easily defined. And the challenge, I think, for IT and IT executives is it's a little like air conditioning. It's when it works, nobody notices. When it doesn't work, everybody notices. So you have a little bit of an asymmetric appreciation curve in your chosen profession. But I think creating value, to me, it's a matter of measurement. What is it that you're trying to do? It's parameters. We've all seen the boil the ocean projects that are doomed to fail, and typically the more grandiose the name the project gets, the higher probability it's not going to ever come to fruition. And most importantly, I'd say active partnership between business and IT. So my current role in building product platforms, we can't do anything without legal, technology, and ops. It'll look great on a deck. It'll look great in a presentation, but it'll never work until all those different things come together. And I think ultimately that active partnership is what leads to innovation. There's lots of discussions this morning about innovation and certainly a reliance on technology to deliver those innovations. But my experience is they'll never deliver it in a box. I mean, you can't just say, hey, you guys go and think of great stuff and come back to us with innovations. There really has to be that active partnership with the business and setting the right expectations. There's lots of, in a firm like ours, Morgan Stanley, Smith Barney, we have 18,000 financial advisors, 1,000 locations. You've got a lot of people that want things yesterday. But typically there's a bit of a Pareto principle at work in almost anything that you do, that if there's 5 things you wanted to accomplish, if you did, numbers 1, 2, and 3, you make 80% of the people happy, and numbers 4 and 5 create all the headaches. And you have to start to get to that right balance with your technology partners to say, all right, I can wait on those other 2. Can I make 80% of the people happy and sell the idea? So, to me, that was part of the active partnership of not just, here's my punch list, when can you get it done? Simplicity is also important. I think when the two groups operate separately, the business will have a great idea of what a product should be and what will sell, and can overcomplicate things. And likewise in IT, they can come up with a solution that can be overkill. So, we're all familiar with the saying that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And I think when you have those parameters and you set the expectations, you can actually get much more elegant solutions from your team to say, what are the things we really need to do, and to start winnowing it down. The projects that I've found that are the least apt to produce any kind of innovation or insights are those big skunkworks projects. You got all the money you need, go solve the world's hunger and come back. And they almost never come up with anything. The things that I'm always most impressed with is you got very little money, you got a hard problem, come back with an answer. And often it's the junior people that are closest to the work. If you challenge them in the right way, they'll start to come up with certain things that you can do that could solve the problem in a way that may be more simple than the business originally thought of. Prioritization is really key too. We'd always want to have the magic wand and have everything done yesterday. But what is most important? We rolled out a desktop project at Merrill Lynch that, and I can say this because it's years ago, none of those people are still around. It won all kinds of awards and it was a disaster. So, if you're an advisor and you're dealing with clients in our business, you have kind of 3 things that are your oxygen. It's market data, my ability to transact in accounts, and seeing what's in client accounts. Now, data, analytics, all that stuff is really good, but if you put in a new analytics and you crash order entry, you've just shut down the cash register for the day. So while the group was winning awards for design, they were putting us out of business. And at that point in my career, I was actually dealing with that. And I can tell you that prioritization was not something that entered the realm. And years later, I figured out, unfortunately, the way they managed it was business and technology never talk to one another. So, hence the point about that. And then I guess the final point I think is a good thing to expand on in a forum like this is around buy versus build. There can be anchoring on both sides that the technology organization might say it's too risky to buy something, or we would rather build it on our own. Business might maybe be more apt to go one way or the other, but I think it's an interesting balance. It's buy, build, or rent for buy maybe, and it's an acquisition, but certain organizations can get hung up on it's got to be our way or not at all. That's an important thing to get over, particularly in a world that's got product cycles that are moving as fast as they are. So, an interesting discussion today.
Okay. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me here. I guess I'll start by saying that obviously I work at Walmart. My distinguished panel have asked me, what is the people group? What do you do? So obviously we've got 2.2 million people who work for Walmart or under the Walmart umbrella across the globe. So my team is basically responsible for working with the HR leadership and developing strategy for the systems to actually manage those people across the globe. Prior to Walmart, I worked at Dell for 11 years. I worked for 7 different CIOs, so I have plenty of opinions about what CIOs should or shouldn't do in that 11-year period. And I've got 30 years in the technology field. This whole notion of value, I like analogies. So the analogy I'll draw is I think our field really has 2 parts to it. There's science to what we do as technology professionals. And I think the science is pretty clear. And if all we had to do was manage the science, our jobs would be really easy. There's art to what we do. And I think as technology leaders, the art has shifted to things like influencing skills, selling skills, my ability to listen to what the customer really wants before I start trying to do things from a technology standpoint. So I'll talk a little bit more about this art and science, but the other part of the art is all of the disciplines that we understand very well as IT professionals. So our project management offices, our software development lifecycle, our testing methodologies, things that our customers look at us with quizzical faces and go, what are they talking about? So part of this art is developing those interpersonal skills to work horizontally across the organization. Part of that, the art is also being able to communicate what we do in a language that the business actually understands. And then foundational to all of that, I told you I like analogies, so I'll use a sports analogy. Usain Bolt broke the world's record in the 100 and the 200. He has a very specific and technical way that he practices. So one of the things I talk to my team about all the time is the art of what we do, you have to practice it. So you can't come in every day and not follow the methodologies and the practices and use the tools that we deemed are important to be a high-performing IT organization. If you don't practice, you can't go fast. So my customers tell me all the time, Ben, you guys are too slow. You're not delivering the products fast enough. And so one of the things we're doing is we're spending time practicing our art and the science so that we can get fast. And I believe when we crack that code, then we'll get to the point where we have the kinds of relationships where we can actually begin to show the value that we're giving to the organization. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Seven CIOs in 11 years.
And one of them was there 5 years.
All CIOs in the room. That doesn't sound very good, but I think a lot of obviously interesting topics have been brought up, and there's a lot of different directions we can go in, and it's good we have a lot of time to talk. I think when we were talking about sort of the panel theme, we were going back to a recent book, the Real Business of IT by George Westerman and Richard Hunter. I think George might be in the room, I'm not sure, but it kind of looked at a lot of different ways that IT can deliver value to an organization. I mean, there's some obvious thinking about creating efficiencies and cost savings. There's obviously the ability to boost profitability across different units, which is always great. And then there's sort of the value, the intangible or value of a CIO and their leadership and what that brings across the board. And I think we were kind of talking about it before, but kind of what is value to you? And I think we started talking about it a little bit, but tell me just in quick answers, what are the things that you've seen that CIOs have been able to do to deliver the most value? What have been the most sort of effective practices that they've been able to do for their company and for their IT organization to really show its worth? To not use the word value again.
Sure. I go first?
Mohamad, go ahead.
As I indicated earlier, I've worked with a lot of CIOs and IT organizations as we acquire and integrate companies. Prior to Avaya, I was at IBM, and I oversaw 13 integrations. The way we did integrations was that we stayed with them for 2 years, 8 quarters, and we measured them at every quarter in a very detailed manner. And IT was a key element of the results. And so, I'll just give you an example of one of the practices that we had at IBM. We would acquire a company that would have a different CRM system. IBM uses Siebel. Sorry about that. I don't work there anymore. But,
is that why?
Yeah, that's it right there. You got it. Avaya, right? Avaya uses Salesforce. So, we would get this, we would acquire a company, it would have Salesforce, the one I'm thinking about here, and we would need to, switch all the salespeople over, 1,000 salespeople over to Siebel. And we would shut everything down overnight, change everything, and the sales guys, and the IT would work great, and the sales guy would come in and go, what does that button do? And that one, this one. Well, we can't do anything. So all of a sudden, your sales would drag for 3 months until they learned how to do it, right? And the M&A world is great because it's intense. You have a limited budget. Everything is sort of well-defined. you have $1 million to do this particular transformation, and we know that the transformation is going to drag down sales, but we're going to do it anyway, right? So the challenge that we put to the IT team was figure out how to do this in a way that the sales guy is going to be happy with, right? And so the IT team, with this same budget, this very limited budget, went off and came back. One of your hard problems, right? Limited budget, hard problem. Went away, came back, and said, hey, we figured out a way to make a smooth transition, make all the back-end piece of this thing similar, but have the folks coming in continue to use the Salesforce front end, route it all into Siebel, reconcile the data. We had acquired a company called Essential that supposedly did exactly this in the back end, though we never used it. So they figured out how to use it, right? Company we acquired. And create this very smooth migration. I don't think in my 13 years at IBM I've ever seen a sales executive really truly excited about an IT project. This guy was like all over this thing, right? But that's just the implementation. You have to actually roll it out. We have the luxury of this very rigorous 8-quarter measurement. And by having this 8-quarter measurement, you could actually see the performance of this thing and what it did for the sales force and the revenue at the end of the day. And those types of, I think, very, very measurable, tightly contained projects can be very valuable. Now, in the M&A world, we provided a platform for the CIO to not only measure, but communicate it up to the CEO of the company, of the IBM company. Look at how well this huge acquisition is doing, and it's because we install the sales methodology. So I would say that in terms of not only creating value, but also demonstrating value, a big part of it is not only having your KPIs, but having people care about your KPIs and communicating those KPIs out. So I'll pause there.
Good, good. Let me kick it over to Jim, because we were talking about this, and you're definitely on a different sort of side of this as a COO, and you talked to me about that it's great that our CIO wants to do something, but I have to manage P&Ls here. There's a very real thing that I have to deal with, and a lot of the time that can escape IT's view. So
yeah, that's true, and it gets the we'll call it creative tension. It's not always you don't always see eye to eye on those things. We're in the firm that I work for today is Morgan Stanley Smith Barney, which was created as a joint venture between Citigroup and Morgan Stanley. So you're basically taking two very large firms and putting them together. So if we had a close relationship with IT before, in the largest integration ever attempted in our industry, we're joined at the hip, whether we like it or not. I think where the CIO, I mentioned active partnership, which I think is really critical. And I view it the same way I view my lawyers, right? My lawyers say, if they say no, they can say, if they understand my intent, strategic intent, they can give me a good answer. They can say, no, you can't do what you're trying to do, but if the end result is this, here's another way you can do it, right? I need them to be thinking about end results. Same way with IT. I might say, here's what I want. They'll say, well, if you do it that way, here's the reasons why you might have obstacles. But if I understand what you're trying to get to, I can give you ways that I wouldn't know because I don't know the systems as intimately as they do. So they really need to be a strategic partner in something like this. And like I said, it's kind of here and now with us today. And we have to get things, there's dollars to be spent, right? And often those, we've all been in that meeting, well, people rolling their eyes, throwing their hands up. Well, gee, if you only had 100 million, we could fix all these problems. Well, the answer is we don't have 100 million, right? So you got 10. What are you going to do about it? And that's where the prioritization really starts to come in. Okay, what can we do for the amount of money? What's the project and the problem at hand? And can we solve it in the prescribed time? And you really have to challenge the team to do that. A good CIO will rein his people in and say, okay, I know here's what they want to do, but here's the value, here's the tangible product or business value we can deliver in this period of time. And if you have that kind of open dialogue, I've seen it where it doesn't happen that way, where they go off and disappear for a couple months and come back and bring you bad news when you're expecting something else, and that's really usually a very tense conversation. So you want to avoid that by having that active dialogue.
Right. Ben, you've worked with a lot of CIOs.
Yeah. So when I've seen it work, it starts with the business strategy. And one of the things that people have a hard time getting their heads wrapped around is that every dollar that's spent in IT won't be focused on strategic projects. So I'll repeat that. Every dollar that's spent in IT won't be spent on strategic projects. So what I've seen done that works well is how do you separate the dollars that are going to be allocated to just keeping the lights on and maintaining what already exists in the environment, and then separate a portion out to really get after innovation and things that are tied directly to strategies from the business's standpoint. And most times when you take that view, you'll find that it's lopsided. There's very little that's left to be spent here. And so the CIO that I'm thinking about who made this work well, he was able to then set targets on that bucket that everyone wants to spin out of, but it's not available. He set targets every year that says, we're going to reduce that amount. IT took responsibility to have projects that were IT-driven projects that would reduce the amount spent maintaining what exists. And then when he saved the money, it moved over to the innovation bucket. So when he could begin to start showing year after year, we saved $8 million out of that bucket. We saved $20 million out of that bucket. Now that money's available to tie back to your strategies. Then they begin to nod their head and say, okay, we understand. We understand what you're doing. And here's the 5 projects that are key that tie back to our strategy. And so we had 2 metrics. One was the percent of IT spend against revenue every year, and the target for that was to go down. And the other one for these strategic projects, it was the ROI, which we had finance people on the business side who had to develop the ROI models, and finance people on the IT side who had to collaborate with them. And then we had audits after the project was completed. Did you actually get the return that you said you would? And so we were able to begin to show this metric going down, which freed up money to spend over here, and this metric going up. And the relationships got better. But it took time, and it didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen in 24 months. It took several years before we figured the model out.
Like a lot of things in IT, right? Speaking of which, Mark, you were talking about things that are kind of a waste of time or a waste of money, and that CIOs need to focus on what's most important. What, without being too overtly selling of Salesforce.com or anything, but what are some of those things? I mean, look, you've been saying that you've been on the road talking to CIOs a lot, and I think that everybody here has a good insight into what IT leaders are thinking. What sorts of things have you heard from them about how they're figuring out what's important and what's not, and how they're able to translate that into value?
Well, there's kind of as I've met a handful of CIOs over the last 6 months, I can't help myself. I have an engineering background. I categorize and formalize and put everyone into a bucket and try to come up with some sort of rhyme and reason. And so I've noticed kind of 2 different types of CIOs. One is like the utility CIO, the guy that'll keep the lights on guy. He's hanging on by a thread in a lot of cases. And in a lot of cases, his value to the business is just simply keeping things running, and that's okay. That's good. Yeah. That's how they're measured.
Some companies want it.
And if you can do it for cheaper, great. That's fantastic. And then there's the innovation CIOs, the ones who are hand in hand with the business, the ones who are working together and who actually know as much about the business as the business side does, where those lines are heavily blurred. And then of course, matrix on top of that is these, in essence, I see this kind of bifurcation happening with companies that are kind of younger than 15 years, 10, 15 years, and older than 10, 15 years, where the older companies are, they're dealing with technology that is so many decades old. They've got all these legacy systems. They don't want to touch them, which is fair, because they work and they're good. And then you have, but a lot of times those systems really slow down their ability to do anything, and they still spend a lot of time, money on it. Then you have the newer companies which don't have a lot of that baggage. And so when you look at, those newer CIOs also just happen to be innovation CIOs in a lot of cases, because they're able to put down a platform for ubiquitous development, a unified data architecture, which is so very important. Having your data organized, having your data cleansed, and having it accessible is a platform for innovation. And that's typically what you see in some of those newer organizations. And when I look at kind of the older organizations, or what we call utility CIOs, they're all striving to try to get into that world. And so from there, from that platform, then you can start to deliver value. And of course, what is the value? Is it reduction of cost? Is it actually having some sort of a business metric that you're tied to? So I've seen scenarios where we'll implement Salesforce at a company, and there'll be some sort of a metric, a business metric, whether it's close rate or time of development, something that has actually gone the right. The business side doesn't just get credit for that. The IT side gets credit for it too, right, as they should, because they were instrumental in that. And that has to do more with how your relationship exists between those two organizations. If you are simply just a doer and not someone who's a partner, you're never going to get credit for those things, even though you were as important and instrumental in those efforts as if you were literally a partner for them. So.
Right. It's always kind of easy to talk about the good things or the positives, and it's not as easy to talk about the negatives. Jim, I want to ask you from your perspective, kind of what have IT leaders done wrong, or what's the thing they do most commonly that the business doesn't like to hear when they're trying to communicate or demonstrate IT's value to you?
I mentioned it in my opening comments. I think the single biggest culprit is scope creep. Is that when projects get too big, and when you see projects get big and they start kind of taking on more of a focus on the technology and how maybe innovative they believe the technology is, but it starts to lose connection to what the business value is, that's where I think you start to lose the discipline. We developed something at Morgan Stanley called the Innovation Forum, and the Innovation Forum was about how to teach, showcase, drive, and expose our best people to what innovation is. The Innovation Forum was actually very interesting because it was not about big tech projects. I think if you ask people what innovation is, unaided, they will answer with some very large project at your firm, right? Whatever that is. And while that's typically true, the smaller or medium-sized projects can have equal value, certainly when taken in total. My standard line on this is why you had a man on the moon before you had wheels on luggage. When you think about it, right? Sometimes the smaller problems are just as easy to solve if you just kind of look at what the problem might be. So part of what's come out of this forum has been quite interesting because we've challenged people to say you need to come up with ways to improve process, save cost, create value for clients or financial advisors in a way that does not create large technology spends, because right now we can't do that. It's all the hammers and saws are going towards the integration. And what we find is often that in a large company, and certainly like in a Walmart setting, you have lots of embedded processes, things that people have been doing for a long time that might have made perfect sense 10 years ago when somebody put it in. But what we find, sometimes it's often harder to stop doing things than it is to start doing things. So I share this with you because one of the things that this Innovation Forum yielded, and in partnership with IT, was a behind-the-scenes process. The details are not important for this crowd, but basically it had become superfluous, and they figured out a way to satisfy a legal requirement by basically turning something off. $15 million save, right? That thing would have kept running forever had we not really asked the question aggressively, and IT, in partnership with us, came up with a way, here's how you can do it electronically. It's not a big spend. We can do this for a few $100,000. So it was understanding where we were trying to get to, but we were challenging more junior levels of the organization to work with them on process. Those kinds of ideas never come from the top down. They've got to come from the bottom up.
Right, right. Mohamad, we were talking about your involvement in mergers and acquisitions, and you went through a bunch with IBM, and now you're dealing with one with Avaya. There's a lot of things that go into, obviously, the IT integration and the planning, and where a CIO comes in that process. Yeah. If they're really up front and with the seat at the table, or if they're just there to kind of execute after the fact. What sorts of things have you seen go wrong, for a CIO in doing some of these things and trying to essentially deliver that value that merger was supposed to create, or that acquisition was supposed to create? So
when I started doing integrations, the IT, this is back at IBM, the IT organization was called GET, Global Enterprise Transformation. And my first, when I first saw this acronym, I said, what the hell is GET? Why do I need one of these things, right? And when I left IBM, the folks on the Get team were on all my top speed dial, numbers, right? And similarly at Avaya, the IT team is deeply, deeply integrated. What I've seen in the past, and we try to avoid this at Avaya going forward, is that the IT team sometimes think that they're just the back office, and that's the death of an M&A project, because the IT team, it has so much influence in the front office. And when I say the front office, I mean sales and products, right? New product rollout, combination of the roadmap, new SKUs, how you make those offers available to customers, and sales, the whole, sort of, quote, the cash, CRM, all of that, right? And the CIOs that sort of sit back and let the integration team sort of drive the whole thing, invariably you run into trouble. The CIOs who say, hey, you know what? We've been doing this thing the same way forever. As in the CRM example I gave you, let me come up with a new solution that's going to, address this business problem, this sales front end problem, right? Those CIOs tend to be very, very successful. I've seen lots and lots of disasters in my time, sort of sitting back and watching. When IBM acquired Lotus, for example, there really wasn't much engagement by the IT community. As a matter of fact, there wasn't much engagement by much of the integration team. It was just sort of, well, let's have Lotus sort of act independently, and we would very slowly migrate the IT and everything else. None of that happens on its own. The IT community and the CIO really needs to be an active participant in order to make these things happen. And so, the one advice I give anybody who's in an IT role or a CIO is, make sure you're front and center in an acquisition. And the other thing is that this is actually one of your opportunities to shine, right? Acquisitions are kind of this, big event that the company rallies around. And if you're there and you're a big part of it and you execute, it's really, it really points out your value. On a day-to-day basis, I have to say, it's a lot harder. And I think some of these gentlemen here have pointed out how hard it is to demonstrate real value. The one other thing that maybe a little bit later I want to talk about is I actually think there's also a middle. So people talked about the utility CIO and the innovation CIO.
Right.
I also think there's a hybrid CIO, and I think that hybrid CIO is really, really important.
Breaking news.
What's that?
Breaking news.
Breaking news, right? So let me kind of give you an example. And this is now outside of the M&A world here. So it's sort of in our world, in the world of communications of Avaya. So the utility CIO, tends to be the ones who's trying to keep the light on, and there's a real important role there. A lot of companies that are older, they have legacy infrastructure. It's hard to keep that going. You talk to them about unified communications, like, please, and so, if they have Avaya equipment, they just buy more Avaya. If they have Cisco, they just buy more Cisco, and life goes on. And then you've got these hybrid CIOs that say, hey, I've got this legacy world. What do I do? How do I step up? And that hybrid role is really critical. In our space, there's something called SIP, which stands for Session Initiation Protocol. It's a way to sort of move, the old world into the new world in terms of real-time communication, voice, video, and so forth. So there's actually one of the people sitting here used to work for this particular company I'm thinking of. So that company, the CIO said, hey, I don't want to rock the boat too much, but what I've noticed is every night I have to call from this building to that building, I have to go out to the carrier and come back into the building. So I have to pay toll charges. Why can't I just use my LAN to go from here to there, right? So this SIP technology allows you to do that. And so they put this particular CIO put that in place and was able to save $12 million in toll charges. Now, he didn't take a huge risk, right? He still had the whole legacy infrastructure. He layered something on top of that, and he got a big project. He got a big win out of it. And then there's the innovation CIO. And to Jim's point earlier about, sort of small budget, high impact, as vendors to those CIOs, we have to realize they don't have this huge innovation budget. And to the extent that we could provide them with small expense, high impact, they're going to be successful, they're going to look good, and we're all going to win. So an example is, I don't know if you guys have ever surfed the web and seen one of those little telephone icons where you can click the call. Anybody ever see one of these things? Okay, good. It takes months to write the code behind that little tiny button, right? And so CIOs, when the marketing team might come and say, well, why don't we have these buttons in various places where they can call our call center or IM with us, or in the future video with our call centers. And the CIO go, oh, you know how much work that is? I don't want to do that, right? And so one of the things that we did is we have this product called ACE, right? And what it does is it allows you to put one of those little buttons on the screen on your website in 8 lines of code. So now we go to a CIO and we say, hey, do you want to implement this? And they go, oh, well, how many millions of dollars is that? Well, it's not much at all, right? They go implement it. They look really good. Then all of a sudden they have an innovation mark, right? Then they can sort of build upon that. And I think as, there are vendors here in the crowd, that's one thing to keep in mind. You can't go, the innovation stuff that's going to cost $12 million is just not going to take traction, right? The innovation stuff that's small budget and high impact, you come up with that stuff, you're going to get traction, and you're going to make that third category of CIO very successful. And if you have some hybrid CIOs, you then start, getting that into the innovation bucket a little bit better. So I know that's a lot of stuff, but as I was listening to these guys, I started thinking about this.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to ask one more quick question before we open it up for questions. So everybody, we should have mics out pretty soon if they're not out there now. Oh yeah, they are. I would say get ready in a couple minutes. Mark, we were talking about something having to do with sort of the people element of all this. I mean, we're really talking about IT leaders at this point. Not every CIO is a, down in the weeds technologist. And a lot of technologies can do a lot of great things, but it's not to say that makes all the difference. But you said something to me about it's not, it's not really about what the technology does, it's how you use it.
Yeah, it's weird for a technologist to say it's not about the technology.
Right.
The technology is a small piece of it. It's a tool, it's a lever, is what it should be looked at as. In the case of, actually, Mohamad's bringing up some great points, and a lot of the stories you were telling feel very familiar, where you're talking, we've gone into a lot of customers who have those legacy systems, and they're looking for a way of releasing that legacy, some of those older systems, right? And so we provide, and this is going to sound like a little commercial here, but Force.com is, in essence, a platform for innovation, for rapid development, rapid innovation. And by exposing a lot of the legacy information into it, you all of a sudden have this platform. So what does that do now that you have this platform? That you've worked so hard, you're making this transition maybe from a utility guy to a hybrid guy, let's call it, or even an innovation CIO. Although innovation means another one of those words like value, which means 100 things to 100 people.
Absolutely.
So what happens to your organization? How does it now change? So now that you have a vehicle, you have, let's say, a common data architecture, you've released that. You've created a similar platform, a platform that allows you to move quickly, like a Force.com. Now what? Now what happens to your organization? Well, your personnel can change now all of a sudden. Now the guys who used to sit there and write software and they were very tactical and had their head in the weeds, they were thinking about how to deliver the service. Now all of a sudden they can be transformed, they can be retooled into more of a business analyst role. Right, a very different role. And your most senior technical people, well, there's still hard technical problems out there. They're not going away. They're still very much there. But there's just not as many of them because now you have this kind of common broad-based platform that sits across it all. So when you're looking at kind of how your organization changes, it's this process that gets enabled by the technology. It's a lever that is allowed to all of a sudden change the way you interact with business, possibly maybe even move to a more agile methodology. Once again, the word agile is very popular now. It's as popular as cloud, a few other keyword, kind of hot words out there. But this platform for growth, for rapid development, allows your business to change, to metamorphosize into something that is a lot more agile, a lot more iterative, where now you can sit down with your business partners and actually literally build the application together, in essence, or a first draft of it, so that everyone knows what they're getting, and you're brainstorming together. Right? Now you've completely changed the dynamic of your organization entirely. But it's very important that you have this base, this platform, this foundation in place, and that you can release a lot of that legacy information up into a unified data layer.
Okay, we got a lot of other topics, obviously, we can touch on from everything else that's been mentioned, but we want you to do it for us. So get up and ask some questions. If you have a specific question for a specific person, please direct it at them, or if you want us to just have a free-for-all, we can do that too. So come on up to the mics.
Hi.
Hi.
Andrea Yeager. I work for Liberty Mutual. And one of the questions I had for you guys was, how do you, speaking of value, how do you measure, how do you define the measures that you can then leverage to show the value that IT brings to the table? And I'm thinking about it too in terms of how do you make your measures fit with the business measures? Do you have some examples or a process that you might have used to get there?
It's a great question. Ben, you were talking about metrics before. Do you want to take a stab at that?
I think the most critical thing, I've worked for 3 major corporations in my career, and each one of them had their own business language. And I think the most important thing is for us to get out of our technical jargon and translate what we are doing for the business in the same language that they talk about their business. So Walmart, for example, spends a lot of time talking about return on investment, growth, and leverage. So those are kind of the triangle, the 3 fundamental things that we're focused on in our 3-year strategy from a business standpoint. So what we're doing is taking that same language and talking about our business in that exact same language because they understand that. So that would be my advice, is to try to speak in the language that your business talks about the way they run their business.
I've got a couple of examples I could give you. So that CRM migration example, this Salesforce, the Siebel thing that I told you about, the metrics that we use wasn't how long the project took or how long it cost, but the salesperson will tell you that in a good world, 60% of his time, his sales reps are out with customer. They're at customer-facing engagements, right? And when you do this cutover, it drops to 40. So that's how we measure the IT team. And the IT team wasn't used to being measured like that. So that type of metric that associates directly with how the business unit leader, or sales leader in this case, thinks about it, makes it relevant, right, to Ben's point. The other example is sort of on a cost side, and it's sort of from a vendor perspective, right? So as we engage CIOs and we tell them, well, if you put this SIP thing that Avaya has got here in, it's going to allow you to save X millions of dollars. We actually built a calculator. And the way the calculator works is you put in kind of 3 numbers and you get 1 level of specificity. You can put in 50 numbers into this thing and get a really specific thing. But all of a sudden, you gave that tool to the CIO, and that CIO can use that tool to create metrics internally, and so you facilitated that, right? And then do that translation that Ben talked about of, of the sort of the vendor-provided metric to the business metric. I think if the CIO can do that translation from to business metric, you've got a lot of value. So the vendor can help by providing some of the metrics, but if all the CIO is doing is creating these metrics that vendors should have provided and not translated into the business stuff, it gets lost in the organization. And the CEO and the direct staff, which I'm one of at Avaya, we just don't pay attention to it. And you do really need the CIO's peers to pay attention to this stuff.
Mark, did you have something you want
Yeah, yeah. So I've seen a ton of examples of different ways of measuring these things, and it's actually part of kind of actually how we sell. We typically would provide, in some cases, we're selling on price, and we will provide total cost of ownership calculations, return on investment calculations, and so when you talk about the utility, the CIO, that's a great way to measure it, right? It cost me X, now it costs me Y. I'm retiring this system, I'm retiring that. Okay, that's the most obvious way, right? But when you're talking about a different type of projects around where you're changing the way sales happens. The business metrics and the IT metrics should be the same. They should be absolutely the same. There's no reason to split them apart. They should be set up initially when you sit down. It's almost like if you're people who run a really good meeting, they set up the agenda, the points, what we're trying to get out of this meeting in the beginning. No different in a project. These are the metrics we're trying to hit. This is the goal for everyone in the room, not just the business side. And we'll all get measured on this. And some of the most progressive organizations I've seen, I've come across, will do that. And so everyone knows, everyone's on the same page. It's all equally communicated across, and the responsibility is actually spread across the two different divisions. When you're talking about consumer-facing, so people do like Starbucks Ideas, which is an example, which is an outwardly-facing website. Like that one, it was a very hard thing to measure. So beforehand, it's not something that it didn't get measured like an increase in lead conversion or a decrease in cost. It was about utility and about number of people that came to the site, right? Because it was kind of an impromptu site that Starbucks put up to drive idea innovation around their stores. And so in the end, they said, okay, well, if we get like 3 or 4 really good ideas out of this, it's a success. Turned out they got many more of that. But you have to make custom measurements in a lot of cases. I don't think there's one generic measurement. I know there's a lot of methodologies out there about measuring. There's not. You have to look at the project, understand what you're trying to achieve, and then come up with a metric that makes sense for everyone, and make sure everyone is held to the same metric.
Okay. Let's go over here.
I actually think this gentleman
Oh, sorry.
is next.
Okay. Sorry, the lights.
Ladies can go first. That's all right.
Let's say that I'm doing business valuation, either on the buying side or on the selling side. And I'm curious, free for all, anyone who wants to answer, what has been going on lately to try to get a more precise match between the claim for the value of the records, the data, and the actual value? Are you doing gap analysis as far as what would for example, what would our call center or our sales department be valued at if someone were to actually audit all of our data? And I'm going to sit down.
Well, call center and data, I can answer a few of those.
Yeah, you probably know some of that.
So typically, you have to baseline, obviously, before you start the project. And so that typically happens in our case. A lot of times when we come in, especially, we're coming in after a failed Siebel implementation. So typically, the only thing left for us is the crumbs, right? They just spent $100 million on Siebel. So what's left for you, Salesforce? We'll throw you $1 million. There's not much left for us. So we have to justify ourselves from the get-go. It's unfortunate that that's how the world works, but that's how a lot of our engagements have worked to date. But it's usually, okay, where are your metrics now? What's your lead conversion right now? What's your opportunity, what sort of opportunity close rate do you have right now? Now we've measured it, we've got the data, we've actually done some statistics on it. Now let's implement this new process, this new tool, and then of course let's go back over a period of time and measure those things. And we have to justify ourselves, more so because a lot of times we're coming from a situation where someone's already scorned and upset about buying technology. And so now they're going to hold us to the metrics that their first vendor wasn't held to in a lot of cases. So we've got a lot of experience with that. Call center, it's about what's the metrics of how many calls someone could take, how many cases can be closed and solved in a certain period of time. What sort of accelerators does the software provide? And typically it's because during the sales cycle we do a very deep analysis of cost and return on investment, and then you go back later on and do it again. So it's just to have a commitment to that more than anything else, and going back and of course auditing everything as you go through it. Now, it's always interesting when you look at data, right? Statistics is an interesting science in itself because you can skew statistics any way you want in a lot of cases. So, could that have meant an uptick in sales that would have happened anyway during that period of time? So a lot of times we'll go and we'll try to look at we'll look at the measurements over a long period of time to try to remove some of the anomalies that exist out of that. You know, maybe we did this right before Christmas period, the Christmas period of time. We put this new system in. Well, maybe there was an uptick in sales anyway. So what you have to do is actually look at it over the long haul. So you really can't tell a lot of cases for a year or two, if not more. And you have to continually look at the data. So,
you know, I can. We get a lot of questions around the call center because for those of you who don't know, Avaya equipment runs in 47% of the world's call center, right? So this is an ongoing question we face. And similarly, you sort of benchmark all the data in terms of how quickly calls get processed. There's a lot of operational sort of operations research stuff around the call center, well established, but it's actually still not sufficient, right? And so I think I mentioned I manage the emerging products group within Avaya, and one of the things that we actually have two products that we're rolling out, but it's basically to give tools to the CIOs to figure out what it is they need to do in a call center environment. The first one is is sort of when you call into one of these phone trees and you press 1, 2, 3, you go through this whole thing. So this first tool actually looks at over a long period of time what happens to all those calls in that phone tree, and maybe at a certain point 15% of your callers just abandon the call because they're ticked off at how long they have to wait or whatever, right? And so this is data now that one can use to say, hey, if I optimize these points in this graph, maybe I can get this thing to be shorter, meaning you're saving more, potentially more money. Also, you have happier customers. And then at the far end, maybe the exit rate out of the right node, the node that says I want to buy something, is higher. These are now things you can measure, right? So you have the tool to benchmark it and measure. The other tool that we're rolling out is one that says, okay, now that I'm done with the phone tree and I have a live agent, from the point that I get to the live agent to the point that the live agent hangs up, what happens? A similar phone tree, right? And did I result in a sale or not a sale? And that type of data is extremely valuable. It's actually those things that I just described there fall into this category of small budget, high impact. And those are the kinds of things that we're hoping to provide to the CIO, so then they can do that, mapping as you described, and then translation into the business value for their peers, right? So a peer might be the person at Morgan Stanley who's selling different kinds of funds, and then all of a sudden they start seeing that they have better customer retention, more revenue because you're doing more upsell, those kinds of things. It doesn't have to be a whole lot, but those business unit leaders are really excited about that, right?
Thank you for being so patient.
Oh, that's okay. Gabino Roche with the New York Stock Exchange. I'm actually interested in seeing how you guys would measure value at like a portfolio level, and I want to give you a little context. At the New York Stock Exchange, I'm using Agile as a means to an end, but at a tactical project level, for example, I have the teams all measure business value, okay? Meaning in a simple scale of the highest is a 5, the middle is a 3, and the lowest is a 1, right? But one of those things, what that enables me to do is for all of my projects, I'm able to tell the business, hey, we've delivered 80% of the value at some point in time, right? And it's an arbitrary figure. The division I work in, we're selling a number of different products. Nothing is, set as like Avaya's, call center thing. So it's hard to measure them apples to apples across. But when you're trying to figure out, 80%, 50%, whatever, I'm trying to keep it simple. So that works well at the project level. But at the portfolio level, where I'm trying to negotiate with the business partners, and we've got limited resources, trying to get value for those projects at those levels, even using those same metrics, it's a little difficult. So I'm kind of curious as to maybe some of your experiences and what you've done at the portfolio level to measure business value.
So let me Let me take a stab at it. I think if I understand your question is you're right, at the project level I can satisfy 80% with a certain level of functionality that I can sell, but I've got 15 projects. Whose projects do I do first and at what level of detail? If you're running into that, I think one, you probably have an organizational issue, not a technology issue, because there needs to be kind of a traffic cop at a business level that's going to make that call and a referee among the constituencies. And by the way, I've been involved where that doesn't happen. You got a real problem, right? So I think that's the first thing I would suggest. The second thing is, companies have to distinguish between what saves money, what generates revenue, what improves user experience, and you can do it. You can sort it lots of different ways as to what's important to you. You can do it just on okay, here's a net present value of each one of these projects based on cost saves versus revenue. You could do it based on strategic value, but you should come up with, if not a methodology, an approach to say, well, generally speaking, this one would be ahead of this one, right, in any given scenario. If you don't have that, my suggestion would be that's something that's a strategic discussion the technology organization needs to have with the business to come up with an agreed upon framework.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've seen it work is right along the lines you're saying. What are the business capabilities that are required in order to do the work? Rather than what people love to do is go straight to the project, not only to the project, but I've seen this product and I want to go buy this. How long will it take to implement it? And so what we like to do is go back and let's talk about business architecture first. What are the capabilities that are required in that business function? And then have the business have a discussion about that. What's most important amongst those capabilities? And then we would map, because obviously you've already got projects on the roadmap, so then you'd map projects to capabilities, and then you say, we've got a gap here. There's a capability that we need that we don't have work going on. Or we may have work going on capabilities that are the lowest priority capabilities for the business function. And those kinds of discussion really gets the business focused on capabilities for the business versus technology, which is where I think you can really get wrapped around the axle.
Okay. Another question over here?
Hi, my name is Shovik. I'm CEO of ADIA Consulting. Jim Walker's on our board. So the question is, you mentioned about, no, Jim, I'm going to save you this question. But it's for you, Jim. Yeah, my appraisal is coming up in 3 months too. So. But I just want to share actually an example of a client of ours, Verizon Communication. And this is on the theme of, having the different CIOs. So it's an amazing organization where I've seen a role of like a senior CIO, and they actually have CIOs, one who does the hybrid CIO function, one who does the utility CIO, and the innovation CIO. And last year they added 2 more roles. They added a CIO by designation of front door, whose only purpose was to provide constant feedback to the business on what value the other CIOs were providing. And it's amazing, and they did it. And yeah.
What do you call that?
And so, I want to share this because I find it a pretty creative organization. So what has happened over the years is, apart from the fact that all these CIOs have had their jobs for the last 8 to 10 years, the other interesting thing is whether they buy companies, like they go and do these massive buy like MCI, or they divest companies when they sell off a large part of their assets to Frontier, it's absolutely seamless. And these projects happen like within 6 to 9 months. So I just want to share that with you and also see if in your career and your what you've observed, if you've seen organizations that have done this, or there's that, it's a large company, so it can afford 7 CIOs. But in general, I just want to throw that out. Thanks.
I've seen CIOs and then business line CIOs. I've seen that a ton.
Right.
But I don't think I've seen the CIOs broken up into philosophies on, on how they approach their jobs.
That sounds very rare.
That sounds a little insane,
right?
Actually.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds excessive. Almost, but I guess
sounds like everyone gets a CIO title there.
Yeah, I would concur. During my time at IBM, I worked with a lot of CIOs. There's a master CIO, right? And then there's sort of sub-CIOs. There's specific functions. I don't think I've actually ever come across a case where there were 3 or 4 in parallel. But I tell you, that front door CIO role, that sounds pretty cool. I'd like to do that. So.
Do we have any other questions? There we go.
Hi, Terry McCormick. I'm actually a business architect for pharmaceuticals, and sometimes we have an arrogance that it's a very complex, long process, and so you need a lot of expertise to understand it. And yet I think that all industries have that level of uniqueness and expertise, and all of you have talked about the translation role and dialogue between the IT side and the business side. And to some extent, a lot of times on the business side, you don't have someone who's really all that aware of all the complexities of all the things that IT impacts upon the things you're considering. So it suggests this translator role. Should this translator role be on the CIO side? Should it be on the business side? And roughly how much of a percentage of time should someone allocate to, let's say, your year's portfolio of activity towards making sure that your decisions really do reflect an understanding, I think, as Ben, as you say, of the common language?
Yeah, I think, I'll take this one, if you don't mind. Because I have a little passion around this topic. I think it's important that you've got people on both sides. And at the end of the day, this whole alignment issue is really our challenge as IT professionals. And as our industry becomes more and more ingrained in how things get done, I can't tell you the number of times when things get tight at Walmart and Dell, everyone's running to the technology team trying to figure out, okay, how do I become more efficient? How do I get involved in my business at a more detailed level? We see more than anyone else sees. And so I don't think at this point in the evolution of our industry, we can advocate that responsibility to the business because they don't get it. They don't see it the way we see it. And so I think it's important that we step up and take that ownership, even though it's real easy to say, you know what, that's really a business's job. They need to figure that out themselves.
One question to that is that sometimes that understanding of that business process that they don't get might take 10 years to understand actually running the business. So it's got to come from both sides.
Yeah,
a significant proportion of time.
Yeah, look, I agree. It has to come from both sides. Somebody has to be able to kind of keep the wolves at bay, right? So, for example, in my role, because I have the title and the badge, I can do that, right? And I talk to my counterpart in technology. We have a scheduled 1 hour every week. Here's the stuff we need to talk about. Here's where it is. He tells me we're live, we're not live. We got a brewing problem here. If you don't have that kind of dialogue, that's where people get fired, right? I mean, I hate to be blunt about it, right? Then the surprise comes out, and then everyone's looking for somebody to blame. And, it's not always the right person, but that's what the outcome is. So, I'll have business units that work for us that say, they're cursing the guy, how come he can't get this done? And I'll say, well, wait, he's got 47 things he's doing, and I told him to do these 5 first, right? So you need to cool off and, come back to me when we get through these other items. I don't pretend to understand all the complexities that that technology deals with, but I understand that they're there, right? And I understand that there's tentacles, particularly in any legacy situations. A firm like Barney and any large pharmaceutical organization, you're right. You pull one string and 3 other things over here change, right? So you have to be thoughtful about that, and senior business leaders should understand that. And if they don't, I think you need to work to educate them.
Yeah, I think, one more point. I think, there's an elephant in the room in the IT profession. There's a reason so many CIOs get fired, right? And we kind of joke about it, and I was in a session earlier where they called them, what was the code? What is it? CIO stands for, what was it?
Careers.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason, right? And so trust, relationship, and accountability, right? And if you don't have those 3 things, you're going to get fired as a CIO. I mean, you've got to have trust with the business. You've got to have relationships, and ultimately you have to be accountable and deliver what you've committed to deliver. None of those 3 things have anything to do with technology, except the back part of delivering the technology you committed to. And if it takes 10 years, then in your company, you guys need to be involved for 10 years until they get there. That would be my advice, my humble advice. Sorry.
I have another thought to add from a non-CIO perspective. Have you ever had a CFO where they make these rigid policies and you go to them and they just won't budge? And you'll say, look, I need to spend this $8, otherwise we're going to lose a $10 million deal. You go, nope, sorry, policy's policy. Anybody ever had a CFO like that? Right, and so those CFOs generally don't fundamentally understand the business that you're in. And I've worked with CIOs who, really are great at the bits and bytes, but they don't understand how the sales force functions, how the services organizations function, what products we're really selling. And those CIOs really struggle. I would say at the end of the day, the CIO, if they are a direct report to the CEO, and they're sitting at that executive committee table, they're one of a dozen people that are running this company, their number one job is to be a business person. And then and the reason they're in that slot is because they have a particular specialty in technology in this case. The CFO, same thing. It's a business person first, has a specialty in finance. The head of legal, general counsel, is a business person first and then has a specialty in legal. And so unless a CIO sees him or himself in that capacity, I think it's not going to work.
Is there any cross-pollination in your organization? I mean, some of the best organizations I've seen, what they do is they rotate their executives around, so that doesn't happen. So that execs, GE does that. Starbucks does that. It's a great one. Actually, they've put one through they call green training. So when you come on board there, you actually work for 2 weeks at every level of the business. You're out there picking beans in the field. You're out there slinging coffee at as a barista. They force you to learn every tier and do that rotation. It's very important. I mean, it's perspective, right? Anything else. If you've walked a mile in someone else's shoes, you can then relate to them. And so I would, if that's not happening in your organization, then maybe it should be.
Thank you all. Those are great ideas. Thank you.
All right. I think I'm getting a signal. I think we're out of time. One more question. Do we have time, Ashish? All right.
Yeah, hi. I'm not a CIO. I'm Michael Davies. I'm a senior lecturer here and run a consulting firm that works on growth and innovation. One of the big changes that's happening to IT is the consumerization of IT. How's that changing your users' perception of what value is or what you guys do to deliver value? Is it triggering a significant shift?
Interesting.
Yes.
Ben?
I'll tell you about a conversation. I'll tell you about a conversation I had with one of my business partners 2 weeks ago. He wanted us to do a project for him, and it was a quick win project. We gave him the cost, and he said, "I can go get that done for half the price, Ben." Right? So we went and huddled up and figured out how to get our costs down. There was a time in my career where I would have never had that conversation.
Why did you let him go do it for half price?
Because we thought we could do it better. We actually really did think that we could do it better. Now, there are times where we actually we do let them go do it themselves within a framework, because we've got security and risk concerns that we've got to take in consideration, which was one of the reasons why we wanted to do the project. We were going to be involved anyway if we let him go do it with a third party. We've also started to use software as a service in some parts of the company today, because that's a faster way to get to a solution. But those are things that 10 years ago at Walmart, they would have never considered.
I think you have to kind of ease into these things too. If I was trying to sell to a large company like Walmart or Morgan Stanley, I think you want to incrementally allow them to try those things, because look, the person comes in and says, "I can solve this for half the price and everything." They're not necessarily seeing all the risks. And to the extent that you make that decision, or you go down that road and you're 2 to 3 years into it and you figure out, oops, they can't do everything they said they can do, and meanwhile you didn't start that project, you've wasted 5 years on that particular application. So, and I think people have lived through those painful experiences. At least I have. So you have to temper your enthusiasm for, let me just grab it off the shelf. It'll work fine.